The Tian Shan, often called the Celestial or Divine Mountains, stretches along the border of China and Kyrgyzstan. Its highest point is Jengish Chokusu, or Victory Peak, formerly known as the peak of the 20th anniversary of the Komsomol. It was renamed in 1946 to honor the end of World War II. At 7,439 meters, it is one of the 5 7,000ers located in the countries of the former Soviet Union and continues to be popular among climbers internationally. In 2019, about 900 people scaled Victory Peak, and 76 of them died in doing so. The figures are so gloomy partly because Victory Peak is the northernmost 7,000er in the Tian Shan. It is a cold mountain with hurricane-like winds and constant avalanches. The window of opportunity to climb Victory Peak sometimes lasts only 3 or 4 days. Those who do not make it in time find themselves in mortal danger as weather can change at any second. At even greater risk are people who decide to make the ascent without undergoing an adaptation period, severely underestimating the dangers of mountain sickness, a climber's worst enemy. Our story today is about one such case. On August 8, 2015, a group of hikers decided to climb the peak to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Soviet victory on the Eastern Front in World War II. The team planned to hoist on the summit a replica of the famed flag that Soviet soldiers raised above the German Reichstag in 1945. One of the members of the expedition was the 58-year-old Mikhail Ishutin, a well-known and very experienced mountaineer, president of the Arkhangelsk Regional Mountaineering Federation and holder of the prestigious Snow Leopard Award for conquering the highest peaks of the former USSR. Mikhail had already climbed Victory Peak and was wonderfully prepared, but sometimes even all the training and experience in the world are not enough for a safe return from the mountains. Mikhail Ishutin was born on January 3, 1957 in the small village of Kosovo in Russia's Bryansk region. He went to school in the city of Bryansk, which today has a population of about 400,000 people. Afterwards, he graduated from the local railway school. One day, the young Mikhail attended a friend's wedding in Severodvinsk, a town near Arkhangelsk on the White Sea. He liked the town very much and decided to stay, doing his compulsory army service on a submarine in Severodvinsk. In 1977, the 20-year-old Mikhail found a job as a welding equipment adjuster at a factory, and a year later, in 1978, he went to the mountains for the first time. Mikhail was enthralled by the feeling of freedom that the mountains gave him. Thus began the love that would last a lifetime. Mikhail had finally found his true calling. I didn't know anything about mountaineering at the time, but I liked the idea. The impressively sized backpacks of the climbers who were on the mountain at that moment puzzled me. I had only brought a sports bag and some clothing, but during this trip I tested myself, my spirit on the steep rocks, and that left an important mark on my soul. I came back a changed man, captivated by the mountains, and I wanted to go there again and again. By 1984, Ishutin had become the head of the Arkhangelsk Regional Mountaineering Federation, and soon after that, he took up a full-time job as a climbing instructor. He loved helping future athletes who called him Uncle Misha to reach new heights. To become better at this job, Ishutin got a degree from the University of Physical Culture in St. Petersburg, becoming a certified coach. His students went on to become famous climbers and mountain rescuers. Ishutin also trained special units of the FSB and the Ministry of Defense. Throughout the years, Ishutin made over 400 ascents of varying difficulty levels. His achievements included climbing Everest, the highest peak on the planet. Here's how he himself described it. When you are at 8,000 meters, touching the clouds with your hand, looking around wide-eyed, a new picture of the world opens up before you. A vista hidden from the average person. Each ascent provides a new understanding of myself, of people, of the world. I am simply an explorer of the world who loves life greatly. In 2015, Mikhail Ishutin was nearing 60. He was not only a coach, but also a loving husband and a father to 3 boys. He still went to the mountains regularly, even though his family discouraged him from doing so. Mikhail's niece recalls.
He never complained about his health. He was always as fit as a fiddle. But we all understood that age took its toll. We told him that it was perhaps time to step down, but he refused to give up.
Mikhail decided to go to Victory Peak. His team took about a month at the foot of the mountain to adapt to the altitude. The weather left much to be desired. Winds were strong and there was a danger of an avalanche. At the base camp, everyone was waiting for the short window of time when the ascent would be possible, if no less difficult. The climbers had to abide by strict rules. For one thing, they had to be in excellent physical shape. To test the group's strength, the climbers were asked to come and work beforehand as volunteers on a mass ascent. Ishutin refused to participate, saying that he worked independently using his own system. He was allowed to do so due to his extensive climbing experience. We can now only guess if that was the correct decision to make. Alexander Yakovenko, one of the climbers on that expedition, wrote in his memoirs, "The General Assembly began on July 10th. Everyone had to first go through an acclimatization period on Lenin Peak, after which they would go to Victory Peak. Many of them had arrived at the beginning of the month and had already adapted to the altitude by July 10th. There were 10 days allotted for Lenin Peak, during which everyone had to climb to the top. Ishutin said that he would acclimatize on Huntengri instead. We planned to reach Victory Peak via different routes. One group was going to take the classic route, whereas Ishutin said he would traverse from Narrow Peak to Victory Peak, another indicator of his aptitude. However, the weather and other factors changed our plans. Strong winds and risks of avalanching forced us to postpone the trek. Ishutin did not climb Narrow Peak. It was obvious that he was having difficulties. But we couldn't dissuade him since he was a very experienced climber, one of our best high-altitude mountaineers. He had climbed the Victory Peak twice before. 2 teams from Rostov-on-Don as well as our group consisting of me, Zhenya Prilepa, Sanya Rastorguev, and Yura Kruglov attempted Lenin Peak. In our team, Prilepa and Rastorguev didn't reach the summit, meaning they automatically dropped out of the Victory Peak ascent. In the end, those who had spent the night at altitudes from 65 to 6900 and climbed Lenin Peak formed a single team and were ready to go to Victory Peak. There was a lot of snow. The route was in a very dangerous state. We cooperated with the Ishutin's team, who ended up taking the classic route. However, he left the base camp 2 days later than we did, since he was waiting for the snow to subside, whereas we said that being mountaineers we would go despite the bad weather. There was a very strong wind. Impeded by the weather, the team moved very slowly, sometimes no more than 100 meters a day. In the end, all 3 teams that were on their way up to the top met at an altitude of over 7,000 meters and dug out snow caves in which they waited for the window of opportunity to reach the summit. Several people developed mountain sickness. They were not allowed to go up to the peak and were told instead to wait for the others in the snow caves. Ideally, those who were sick should have been taken down to the base camp, but the teams had only a little bit left to the peak, so they decided that those who were healthy would reach the summit and then climb down together with those who hadn't been feeling well. We had 4 people left in our group. Mikhail's team and the Ukrainian group each had 5 people left. So that's how we attempted to conquer the summit, in this group of 14 people. Because of the deep snow, it took us 4 hours to reach the obelisk. There were big cornices hanging over the left side of the route, which posed a great risk. Further on, the condition of the route was excellent. The thin ridge which starts above the obelisk is usually covered by very hard compacted snow. You stand there, one crampon on one side of the ridge and the other on the opposite side, having to keep your balance while battered by strong winds. This time we were met with deep soft snow. We could leave proper tracks and stand firmly, so we passed this part of the route at a brisk pace, taking into account that the altitude was over 7,000 meters. Eventually, having set out at 3 a.m., we arrived at our destination by noon. At the top, we took photos of our sponsors' flags and the victory flag and started to descend. During the descent, I saw Mikhail trekking towards us, leading his rope team. He was only 200 meters away from the summit. I suggested that he count the ascent as successful and go back, but he said that he would reach the others and then start the descent. His responses were clear and sensible. Nothing foreshadowed any trouble. Mikhail reached the peak, raised the flag, took some pictures, and started the descent. After about an hour, his right leg became very sore and he was almost unable to go any further. This was not seen as an immediate cause for alarm since Ishutin had already complained about pain in his left foot during earlier hikes. As soon as the four of us got down to the obelisk, I radioed Zakharov, telling him we'd made it that far and would be returning to the snow cave. He responded by asking us to wait, saying that Ishutin had fallen ill and was being taken down the mountain. 2 of his group followed us, while 2 others stayed with him. It was very hard for Mikhail to move, his leg was aching, his breathing was troubled, and the high altitude was taking its toll. A sharp gust of wind carried away one of his gloves. The teammates that stayed with Mikhail ran off to catch it, since he could get frostbitten very quickly without gloves in such weather. When they got back to Ishutin, they saw him lying motionless in the snow. Shortly before he died, he said, "Good thing we didn't take Vovka with us." Even in his last moments, Mikhail was thinking about others, not about himself. Ishutin lay on the ground amid the endless snow. His teammates attempted cardiac massage, but in spite of their efforts, after about a quarter of an hour, it became clear that Ishutin was a goner. His eyes glazed over and his skin turned blue. The cause of his death was cardiac arrest. Nikolai Zakharov, the senior coach of the Krasnoyarsk regional climbing team, recalls. The guys tried to resuscitate him, but it was too late. His pulse was gone. They wrapped his body in a blanket and put him in a small hollow in the glacier. There was no way they could get his body back down. A strong hurricane and poor visibility meant the team could hardly find the way to the base camp as it was. This climb was challenging for all the athletes. One of them got pulmonary edema, another one was seriously frostbitten. We had no right to risk even more lives. The descent was very hard for the survivors. The hurricane was incredibly strong, knocking climbers off their feet and injuring one of them. 2 more people narrowly escaped death after slipping on the slope. Thankfully, the teammates managed to pull them out of the icy gorge. 9 days after Mikhail Ishutin's death, his friends and students gathered at the Severodvinsk Youth Center where he had worked. On August 29th, a symbolic burial took place in a local church. Of course, Mikhail Ishutin didn't count on leaving this world so early. He planned to retire and go back to Bryansk, a city to which he was very emotionally attached. His niece, Irina Ishutina, recalls.
He was a very modest man and never talked much about his climbing exploits. We learned later that he nearly died twice during his treks. One time he was climbing a mountain in the Caucasus when a rockfall started. He broke his arm and had to hang on only one hook, dangling from the safety rope. His climbing partner managed to save him, and in 1991 he fell and got a skull fracture. Once again he was in luck, since there was a professional traumatologist nearby. But Mikhail never complained. He was always more worried about others than about himself. One day he came home after another expedition heartbroken because a 22-year-old girl from their team had fallen into a crevasse. But he could not give up the mountains. They were everything to him. He left his heart in the mountains long ago.
Mikhail Ishutin died on August 8th, International Climbers' Day. Mikhail's relatives wanted for his body to be laid to rest properly and not left on the icy slopes of Victory Peak. Orthodox Christianity mandates that the body be buried on the 3rd day after the death so that the soul may rest in peace. But Ishutin was alone, somewhere high up in the mountains, covered not by earth but only by a blanket and some snow. Ishutin had died at an altitude of about 7,300 meters. A few weeks after his death, his family began raising money for an expedition to take him off the mountain. They needed about $20,000 and planned the trek for the summer of 2016 when good weather was expected. His niece wrote the following.
Uncle Misha was a great man. I'm reading comments and articles on the internet, watching TV interviews, and I don't understand why nobody wants to return his body to us, his family, so that he can be properly buried. He always said that climbers were a friendly bunch and would always help out when needed. And now what? Nobody wants to risk lives, saying there are too few high-altitude climbers capable of carrying out a rescue operation. And why then did Uncle Misha repeatedly participate in the search for bodies both in Russia and abroad? He believed it was his duty before his comrades, and he's just been left up there. We can't do that. How can we go on with our lives, knowing that he's there?
The expedition consisted of 23 people from different Russian cities, all the best climbers who were actively training. The group was led by Alexei Karelin. It is almost impossible to get a human body down from such a height. We know that, for example, the bodies of those who died on Everest remained there for decades. This was the first time that Victory Peak had seen such a large-scale body retrieval operation. The climbers themselves said that they never had to get somebody down from such an altitude before. The journey to the summit promised to be extremely challenging, so the group underwent a full medical examination in Arkhangelsk before leaving for Bishkek. The search party arrived at the foot of Victory Peak mid-July. They had about 40 days to try to get to the top and bring Mikhail's body down. The team split in two. Some went up from the Huntangri side, others from the Zvezdichka Glacier. The work was complicated by constant snowfalls and bad weather. On July 19th, both groups met to plan the way up to the summit. They decided to use August 2nd to the 5th as their climbing window because the forecast showed the snowfall would weaken a bit during those days. However, the mountain did not allow the climbers to take Mikhail with them. Once again, it was very snowy. Having spent 2 nights at the pass, the climbers realized that they were unable to carry out the mission and would have to leave Mikhail on the mountain. We made an honest attempt, but without trying too hard, since we needed everyone to get back home alive, Karelin said. It would be very difficult to repeat such an operation again, so Mikhail's body now remains at Victory Peak. In 2020, the Severodvinsk Climbing Center, the largest climbing facility in Russia, was named after Mikhail Ishutin. His fellow climbers have installed memorial plaques near the places where he worked and trained other mountaineers. This is how his students remember him. It is so painful to know that you can't, as usual, come to training any day, hug him, listen to his usual good-natured grumbling, and learn about news from the mountains. All his life he invested in other people, in training and fulfilling other people's hopes, in bringing up a new generation of athletes. Thousands of people all over the world knew him. Hundreds of people owe their destinies to him. He was always energetic, cheerful, strong, and never showed pain. A man of indomitable will. He was the best coach in the world and pretty much a second father. I want to say on behalf of everyone who loves him and remembers him as forever young and joyful, Mikhail Vasilyevich, I believe you will always be with us. I did not have time to say this when I had the opportunity, but I will at least say this. I'm insanely grateful for your contribution to my life. I love you very much. My deepest condolences to the wife and family. Could Mikhail Ishutin's life have been saved? In truth, there were a lot of red flags that year. His colleagues recalled that Ishutin was having difficulties climbing and that the weather was awful. Even younger climbers had to deal with mountain sickness and frostbite. Perhaps if Mikhail had listened to all those who told him that he should turn back, he would have survived. It seems that he somewhat overestimated his strength that time, but as for death from sudden cardiac arrest, that happens quite a lot in the mountains. As many as 8 people died from cardiac arrest on Victory Peak alone. In the end, Mikhail Ishutin stayed in the place to which his heart has called him all those years ago. He spent his last moments in his beloved mountains, at a breathtaking altitude, looking down on the world which he had dedicated his life to exploring with passion and vigor. We're all scared of death, but mountaineers see it as an inevitable part of life. What are your thoughts on the subject? Feel free to share them in the comments below. And as always, stay safe.